So I want to thank the Bureau Chiefs who are willing to accept my invitation to come to the Encompass Policy Summit. So we've had this is I think our eighth year to do an Encompass Policy Summit, and this is the first time I've had the Bureau Chiefs.
All right.
Yes. Now we, as a panel, I think at times maybe one or two would come and do a presentation. So I'm really excited to have a panel. The three bureaus that I know are really busy and have a lot of priorities this year. So let me first introduce them, and then they're each going to give about a 5 to 7 minute presentation about their top priorities, and then we're going to have a little Q&A. So here we go. So right next to me is Joel Taubenblatt. Joel is the acting bureau chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. I also had the honor and privilege to work with Joel when I was in the Wireless Bureau for like a short moment in time before I went to go work for Commissioner Clyburn, completely changing bureaus to work with the Wireline Competition Bureau. And then next to Joel is Trent Harkrader. Trent is the chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau. I know many in the room work with Trent and his team. Likewise, I had a great opportunity to work with Trent when I was in Mignon's office. And then Alejandro Work, he is the chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. And I haven't had so much opportunity to work with Alejandro, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, you're very kind.
Some of us.
But they're doing some really great work, and our member companies have been in and talking with your team about broadband labels and other things. So looking forward to hearing each of your presentations. So how about we start with you, Joel? Talk about what you've got going on this year, what your priorities are, then what we can do to help.
Yeah, thanks very much, Angie. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So as Angie said, I'm Joel Taubenblatt. I'm the acting chief of the Wireless Bureau. Very happy to be here with you today at the Encompass Policy Summit, and happy to be with my colleagues, Trent and Alejandro, on the panel as well. I thought I'd talk a little bit focusing on spectrum and some of the priorities of the FCC with respect to spectrum. The Wireless Bureau does a lot of work in the spectrum area, also Office of Engineering and Technology and other bureaus and offices as well. So I'll probably touch a little bit on their work as well. First and foremost, I guess I would say that it's a really critical time for the nation in terms of spectrum access and spectrum use. There are a lot of really important national priorities that are riding on that, economic and national security, and trying to expand broadband coverage to all Americans, and trying to promote innovation and scientific research as well. And so the issues have been very interesting and fun to work on. At the FCC, we are trying to be part of really a whole of government approach to spectrum policy. Last summer, at the direction of the chairwoman, we worked very closely with NTIA to update our memorandum of understanding between the two agencies to try to strengthen our collaboration and coordination. And in particular, we tried to set expectations, clarify expectations. We tried to provide for greater sharing of information. And we also tried to increase opportunities for longer term planning in the hopes of being able to set expectations and paths for the various stakeholders. And so we have been working well with NTIA and the federal agencies, and look forward to continuing to do that. We've also been focused on trying to identify new spectrum bands for new uses, and one of the bands in particular that we have been focusing on of late is the 12.7 to 13.25 gigahertz bands. The Commission put out a notice of inquiry last October, looking at whether it's possible to have flexible terrestrial uses in that band, looking at incumbencies in the band, as well as opportunities for sharing. And so we are continuing to work towards the next step there, and also exploring other bands that I can get into later in the Q&A session. We also, in addition to trying to identify new spectrum bands, we're trying to take a look at what networks of the future are going to look like that use spectrum to provide services. And in particular, we have been taking a look at hybrid satellite terrestrial networks and trying to think about what regulatory framework might make sense for those types of models. Just recently, we released a draft notice of proposed rulemaking, taking a look at these issues that the Commission is looking to consider for the March agenda meeting. It focuses on taking a look at satellite operators or satellite companies basically being able to operate using in combination or in partnership with terrestrial wireless operators using flexible use spectrum that's been allocated for terrestrial uses. And we think this holds a lot of promise for the public, particularly in expanding coverage to terrestrial wireless provider subscribers in unserved or underserved or remote areas, and in particular for emergency services. And we are continuing to look at sort of the vertical space for spectrum-based services. Just in January, the Commission put out an NPRM on UAS or drone use in the 5 gigahertz band, and potentially in other bands as well. So we're trying to look at, I guess I would say, spectrum use in 3 dimensions. And I think maybe I'll stop there for the moment and turn it back to you, Angie.
Great. Thanks so much, Joel.
Yeah.
Trent, do you mind going next, describing the work that you're going to do in 2023 in the Wireline Bureau?
No, not at all, Angie, and thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? So that's amazing what you guys do. Like none of that stuff means anything to me. It's just like a lot of numbers and stuff. I shouldn't admit that, especially with Scott in the room. The Wireline Bureau has been incredibly busy. We have a number of top priorities. We typically handle fixed broadband issues, including the horribly broken Universal Service Fund. But I want to focus on a couple of other things that I think are going to be really occupying our time over the next 6 to 9 months. First, I'll start at the top with the affordability program, as we call the ACP, which is the nation's largest broadband affordability program that gives households $30 up to $75 on tribal lands discount off of their broadband bill. What we'll be focusing on in the coming year is some behind the scenes, under the hood enhancements. We're looking to improve the application. We're looking to improve the way that the system works, make it a lot easier for folks to enroll in that program. So that's a very much a watch this space. And in the near future, we'll be rolling out a bunch of different changes to the back end of that program. We're doing a lot of outreach, but I'm going to save some of that for my friend here. We're also focusing on the future. And as Greg pointed out in the last panel, you're looking at an exhaustion of funds next year. And I think the time is now to start talking about the reappropriation of the funding. It's been incredibly successful, 14 months, over 16.5 million households. And we're growing incrementally every day. And so it's a great program that I think deserves a lot of attention, and it will get a lot of discussion going forward.
You have a great partner on the 10th floor. Commissioner Starks just here a few moments ago called for additional funding to make it sustainable over the long term.
Oh, good.
And
so
really,
we're on the same page.
You're totally on the same page.
Yeah, good.
And hopefully, I think the rest of the commission will come along too, right? This is really important, not just to get consumers connected, but it helps with the business case for deployment.
Yes.
Even where, companies aren't necessarily taking BEAD funding, it does help them to justify the cost of deployment because they know that their consumers will be able to take the service.
Perfect. So we're done. We're done, right?
Yeah. Can we work on USF now?
Yes.
No.
I didn't realize I was walking into an ex parte when I showed up.
Oh crap! Do I have to file an ex parte
I
for
don't think
that?
so. I don't think so. Okay. The next thing, which is coming up, the first face I saw when I walked up here was Commissioner Clyburn, and we are working very hard on following through on the Martha Wright Reed Just and Reasonable Communications Act of 2022. It's a really important piece of legislation that's going to give the commission, that if the NPRM is adopted and we follow through with the rulemaking, and it's on the meeting next week, and it will give us all sorts of tools that we hadn't had before to keep those rates and to combat the unjust and unreasonable rates that incarcerated persons and their loved ones are paying. This is something that we have a lot of energy around and is going to be very important to the chairwoman in the agency. Last month, we passed, again, following Congress's Safe Connections Act of 2022, we passed an NPRM addressing domestic violence and putting forward some ideas about how to help those that are survivors of those types of relationships, including how to separate, ideas about separating their lines, ideas about privacy when they contact care centers, and also how can we leverage, how can we just use the ACP or the Lifeline program for those individuals? I think there's a lot of really good ideas floating around out there, and we're going to try to move quickly on that once the comment cycle closes. Digital discrimination, another piece that came from the Infrastructure Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're very excited about the thorny issues that we're looking at here. It's an amazing statute. We did an NPRM last December, and we have until November to write those rules. And I think there's a very vibrant record, as I like to say. And so we're going to be paying close attention, and we're going to bring that in by November. Mapping. Where would I be without mapping? The broadband data collection, which stems from the Broadband Data Act, required the commission to start collecting the most granular data about where broadband is available and where it isn't. And we're now on our second cycle. We just closed the second collection. Per the statute, we're addressing challenges where people come to us and say, hey, on the map, it reflects availability in a particular area. I don't really have that, and so we have to resolve those challenges. We're working to improve the fabric, and really the map is getting better and better almost on a week-by-week basis these days. And so we look forward to the second version of the map, which will feed into the BEAD program in a couple of months. I'm going to check my notes to make sure I hit everything. And then E-rate. E-rate and the Emergency Connectivity Fund. The Emergency Connectivity Fund is coming to a close. We're above $6.5 billion of devices to school kids during the emergency. And so we are now thinking actively about how do we capitalize on all that money that has gone out there for those devices? How do we, is there something that we can do with the E-rate program? So that's another very watch this space thing. Where we're trying to think about, like, with one program coming to an end, what can we do in the context of E-rate or maybe in other contexts to make sure that that connectivity continues.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Alejandro, we're going to pass the baton to you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And I think like you heard from Trent, the Wireline Competition Bureau really is a sleepy bureau. Not a lot of things are really happening there currently. Which I think is the same thing with Joel. I'm, full disclosure, new to the FCC. I think I've been here for probably about a year and a couple of months. So I will kind of start by saying that everybody said the FCC is so slow, you're going to be really bored. And that has not been my experience one day on the job. There is so much that's happening across the agency. And I think as the chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, I really get the opportunity to partner directly with a lot of our across agency partners, right? And I think that I really approach a lot of the work that we do coming from the civil rights space as, the FCC is really leaning into how we operationalize equity and inclusion at every level. So a lot of the themes that we heard kind of covered by my colleagues, is part of what that means in practice for us is that, like Trent mentioned, we are ensuring that we are reducing the broadband affordability gap, making sure that we have maps so that we know exactly where broadband is and broadband isn't, that we are developing kind of model rules and policies to prevent digital discrimination. And I think that, we're going to talk about broadband labels. So we want to make sure that consumers get the information that they need in order to make informed decisions about the service that meets their needs and their long-term budget. And I think personal to me specifically in my bureau is ensuring that the agency has a robust, consistent, and inclusive stakeholder engagement process so that we can ensure that we have diverse input into that process so that we can promote policies that extend our country's telecommunication resources to everyone, everywhere. So, I think that's just like a really quick encapsulation. Of course, within my bureau, we also do a lot of our consumer policy, our disability rights policy, and we ensure that they're active lines of communication with tribal communities, state and local governments, and then of course our entire kind of outreach division, which I think right now is working and has been working for the past few years to really, I think, meet people where they are in community to ensure that they not only know about the Affordable Connectivity Program, but I think in the important consumer protections that are baked into a lot of these new initiatives so that consumers really know that the FCC is a resource and a partner.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So Joel, we know that Congress has a deadline coming up really soon on reauthorizing the FCC Spectrum Authority. Can you tell this audience really what's at stake?
Yeah, sure. Auctions have been a really powerful tool for the FCC and the U.S. government for 3 decades now. We've had something like 100 different auctions, and it's raised about over $200 billion. And there have been a lot of significant benefits that have resulted from auctions. They've been drivers of innovation, of economic growth. They've been robust mechanisms for how to assign spectrum authorizations, representing pretty substantial improvements on the prior mechanisms that were used, like lotteries and comparative hearings and things like that. It's been a very good tool for providing incentives to repurpose spectrum bands, as was demonstrated in the broadcast incentive auction, and of course, revenues from auctions have gone to support a number of very important public interest purposes, including the public safety network of FirstNet.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things we've been spending a lot of time talking about recently is the broadband mapping trend. And our member companies have been submitting their information. You mentioned how one of the windows just closed for provider information, and providers will be updating their information twice a year. The expectation is we're going to continue to see more locations get served over time as the funding it goes out and companies can build their networks even further into rural areas and upgrade, the urban suburban areas that really are underserved. That Infrastructure Act also called for coordination among the agencies and for the FCC to really play a role with its maps, to be mapping what the programs are, how the funding, where it's going. So can you describe a little bit about the thinking that the FCC is doing around that and what the process and timeline might be?
Yeah, sure. So we're doing a lot of thinking, but we're also doing a lot of doing. So the federal funds map, as we call it, is intended to map all federal deployment across the country, and it was tucked into the Infrastructure Act among many other things. And with all the focus on the main broadband data collection and mapping and how that plays into the BEAD program, not a lot of people are focused on the fact that we're working on this other kind of component part of the map that will show where all this funding is. And we've been working very closely with NTIA, Treasury, and the Department of Agriculture, RUS in particular. The three of us, or the three of them with the FCC, are kind of the ones who are kind of the main four funders of deployment. And so we've been working very closely with them to figure out, like, what does the system look like? What is the platform, the intake for those agencies to give us all the information about all their various programs so that we can then throw it onto a map. NTIA has been incredibly helpful, playing their coordinating role across the executive branch to say, we can convene, the very smart data people, we can quickly get into those agencies and get them to you. And we're on track for a mid-May reveal of that map. Like the what I'll call the main broadband data collection map. That map will improve over time.
Right.
But we're really excited about being able to follow through on that and have it as an incredible resource, not only for the FCC to see where others are funding, but this is a map that will be publicly available. People will be able to go to it and see the technology that's served, the speeds, and the deployment status. And it's going to be a great little piece for everybody.
Do you anticipate that the agency might be able to use the map in its assessments of potential changes to USF over time? The Future of USF report, the FCC indicated that the programs do need to be looked at again and taken into account, the various changes as well as the investments that are being made. Do you see the map potentially having a role of information about where broadband is, where it's already being funded? Just curious as to your thinking.
I do. Again, I think we're going to start building out more functionalities as the map matures. But one of the important parts is being able to see historically how far back, if you have something that was funded 5 or 6 years ago, is that an area where in that particular location we should look to fund additional additional deployment or up the speeds or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a real opportunity to look back historically,
Right.
and also moving forward, especially as we get 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out, we'll be able to look at and see where things were when we launched.
Right. What strikes me is, I don't know if you heard Mike Romano say on the last panel that 80% of their subscribers are already on fiber. And a significant portion of the high cost funding goes to the companies that NTCA represents, right? So it'd be really curious as to what's the investment gap potentially that's needed as compared to the traditional price cap territories that had the cap funding and then potentially the RDOF funding. So.
Yeah, I was really interested to hear that. I know Mike and I have talked quite often. I don't think I've ever heard that stat before. I think it's a testament to not only the funding programs that help, but also the commitment of those member companies to their consumers. And it's not easy getting fiber out into some of those rural areas, but they're committed to doing it, and we need to meet them there.
Yeah,
to use the term that he uses.
We at INCOMPAS have a number of competitive providers who found opportunities in areas where there isn't someone like an NTCA member that's serving an area. And, they've been able to use E-rate funding, for instance, to make a real fiber commitment to a community and then edge out from there. So right. I think it'll be great to have the maps. And it's a continuous process, right? Like we say that to our member companies, like, okay, the first one out of the gate, right? Like not perfect, but maps are always changing. And especially when you see constant upgrade of networks and more deployment that's happening, we should see good things changing on these maps. So it's really.
And that's what's reflected in the Broadband Data Act, which is,
yes.
the governing, every 6 months, more data is coming in, but along the way, we're seeing challenges to the underlying fabric, which is all of the locations. We're seeing challenges to the availability, and those, especially on the availability challenges, those are reflected, almost in real time these days. And there's a real understanding now that there's no such thing as the map that we used to use to drive to our grandparents' house. It's all changing, it's all moving, and it's what we need for this country.
That's really great. Thank you for the work that you all are doing to really deliver the information as well as ultimately the connectivity that we all need. I think it's very important to recognize how critical the FCC is as an agency to meet the mission to give every consumer in the United States access to affordable services. So thank you. Alejandro, your team, they're on the ground, working directly with consumers. What are you hearing from consumers? What are the top 3 issues that they call the Consumer Bureau about these days?
I think what is probably not surprising, through so first of all, in my bureau, we have our consumer complaints and inquiries division, which is usually the first touch point that many consumers have with the FCC directly. And that is a really great process that I think some people don't know about. So any help getting the word about it, even to you guys, I think I encourage you guys to use it, because any complaint that you submit gets served directly to your ISP provider, and they have 30 days to actually respond to anything that you say. So it's not just I'm filling in a comment and sending it out into the universe, and then hopefully the FCC sees it and does something about it. Those complaints are really served to the ISPs, and then there's a formal response that happens. To nobody's, I think, shock and surprise, the top three types of complaints that we get are robocalls, right? So that's kind of like our top complaints. We get kind of service related issues. And then we also get kind of billing concerns, like a lot of consumers really express. Bill shock, which is a really real kind of phenomenon where they think that they are purchasing a specific kind of service at a certain price, and then they get their bill and they don't understand where all the different fees are, right? Which is one of the things that we're hoping that the broadband labels really help address. But those really are, I think, the top complaints. But being here with you guys will also kind of brag a little bit about everything that the commission really has been doing to combat robocalls, because really it's a top priority for the commission, and we've been working across multiple fronts to address the issue consistently. So the commission, releases unwanted call data for all of your kind of just in information through our consumer complaint data center. So all this information is available for you guys if you guys really want to geek out and nerd out and really understand what the trends are in real time. These are published daily, right? So you don't have to wait like 6 months to understand the trends. Like this information is up to date and you guys have access to them. So the commission has taken aggressive enforcement actions in recent years against telemarketers for apparent, illegal caller ID spoofing and robocalling. The commission mandated that originating and terminating phone companies implement the stir, shake, and caller ID authentication framework and the internet protocol portions of the networks, by June 30th of 2021. We adopted rules to help voice service providers to stop unwanted robocalls from reaching all of our phones. And we've adopted, rules targeting gateway service providers. So we really are kind of like working on all fronts to ensure that we are addressing, again, the number one most cited complaint by consumers, which is receiving unwanted, unsolicited, unconsenting kind of robocalls and text messages. So that would be, I think, the top three. And then from there, I think everything's great. Customers reach out and they say they love everything about their service, their experience, the availability. But no, I mean, those really are the top three. And I think luckily I'm able to report that there are very clear and consistent strategies to mitigate those consumer concerns.
Well, we're very supportive of the labels. As competitive providers, we think really clear labels are going to help consumers choose the competitor as their service provider. So, we're hopeful too that those labels are going to help us in the environment and really be able to expand our customer base and hence the opportunity to expand our networks. So we're really happy to have been able to contribute to the broadband label process at the FCC. We do have one outstanding issue, and that is that many of our competitors provide enterprise level services. And so that was one of the things that INCOMPAS raised. And we were so grateful to get the clarification from you all that the labels apply to the broadband internet access service that residential, mass market consumers are taking. But there's one petition, a petition for clarification that's pending, just to clarify that this exemption also applies in the E-rate and rural healthcare markets. And so many of our members are participating in those programs. They've always been competitive programs, which is great because we think that they have supported the availability of competitive networks and service to community anchor institutions. And as I indicated, it's allowed for the opportunity for competitors to enter the market and build fiber to communities. So we look forward to continue to working with you on the broadband labels proceeding and bring it to a close. Do you anticipate that further notice that's pending, that whatever may come out of that, we'll have the opportunity to implement that before the labels have to be done for the first time? Or are you thinking timing on that, labels may get done?
Yeah.
And then the further notice, we might need to add things to the labels?
No, so I think we're definitely working through at a fast pace the OMB process right now. And I think specifically when it relates to the further notice, we are excited to kind of see the comments that are coming in and really, I think, track the development of that record. And we really can't say right now whether there'll be an additional rulemaking before the broadband labels are rolled out. But I think again, we really are paying attention in real time as that record develops. So TBD.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay. So Joel, we know that compromise proposal was just submitted into the record in the 60 gigahertz band. So Encompass is infamous for wanting to bring coalitions together and reach compromise. We've done it before. We've even done it with US Telecom recently in the uni proceeding at the FCC. Tell us what's at stake at 60 gigahertz, and does this compromise proposal give you an opportunity at the Wireless Bureau to take the next step?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And I also should note that I'm speaking really on behalf of OET, who's been taking the lead as well in the proceeding. But yeah, we've definitely taken note and appreciate the compromise proposal. FCC engineering staff is actively reviewing it and going through it. The proceeding remains a very significant priority for the commission. And we think that there's a lot of potential there for coexistence between unlicensed operations and radar operations, and are really working hard to bring it home.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. So I'm going to go to Trent next. All right. I think in 2 panels from now, we're going to be focused on the barriers to deployment, of which
Should I leave?
There
Should I
are
leave before then?
No, you should stay, because apparently we can say what we need to and not have to file an expertise letter. But one of the proceedings that's outstanding is the polls proceeding. And, there the commission is looking at additional changes to encourage more deployment on poles, which it really is so needed as a result of the BEAD funding, but also just the private sector funding that's going in, and how much more fiber is being deployed these days to meet the online demand. Any thoughts about what we can do as a coalition to help bring this proceeding to a close?
Yeah. So before I really answer that question, we're very focused on making sure that there's access to polls, that it's affordable and predictable. I think that as we come up onto this incredible moment in deployment with the BEAD program, it would be great if everybody could recognize the opportunities that are there. You mentioned to Joel that you're really good at bringing coalitions together. This would be a perfect example, Angie. The attachers and the pole owners have at times not gotten along perfectly well together. And I think this could be an opportunity where there is a mutual benefit, given all of the broadband funding that will be out there in the very near future, to kind of maybe knock down some walls between them. It's going to be very hard for the FCC to do that. We're committed to doing that, but it's not going to be something that we can solve on our own without the help of a coalition of people. So if there are lots and lots of reasonable people throughout our ecosystem, if we could put some of them together, not even in the same room, but on a Zoom call or something like that, and see if we can hammer out some sort of a way to get through this. Because I think it is a moment where we need to be attuned to everything that we can do to get this deployment out there.
Thank you for that comment. Yeah, it's been our observation that we've been able to reach compromises when the FCC is playing a lead role in messaging to both sides of the table that you don't want us making this decision, right? So you all need to get together and come to an agreement.
Yeah, you looked right at me when you said that, right?
Yeah, it works really well.
You don't want me making
Trent.
decisions.
So I will say, former Commissioner Clyburn who's in the audience. And we saw she did this in a wireless proceeding while she was chair of the FCC, and it was a successful approach. And Chairman Pai, did that when we came up with our compromise proposal with US Telecom on the uni petition, right? So it is a great way to get the parties in the room and look, we're the regulator. You don't really want us to be the one, so you all need to come to an agreement. But I love it, Trent, when you give me assignments and remind me the way we do things. So
I mean, you
taking
opened the
notes.
door. Like you said, like you were bragging to Joel about how you're great.
Well, so we just have a few minutes. Are you open to taking any questions from the audience? You interested? Yeah, willing to take some? All right. Does anybody have a question a burning question they really wanted to ask? I think everybody's waiting for the break. They need their afternoon coffee. Okay, so any final thoughts?
Thank you for inviting us. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to get outside the agency and to talk to the people who are really making things happen out in the real world. And I don't get out enough, and I really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, I'm so glad that all three of you were able to come. I know that we haven't had as many opportunities to get together since COVID.
Yep.
But as you can see, we're all back now. Everybody worked so hard through COVID, and y'all did too. I can remember many late night phone calls with some of you trying to work through issues, and all these folks that kept everybody connected during COVID. So thank you for coming. We hope this isn't the last time. Maybe you'll be willing to do it again next year.
Definitely.
Okay.
Happy to.
Fantastic.